The call came on a quiet morning, the kind that's supposed to be ordinary. "Ma'am," the woman said, her voice careful, almost polite, "the remaining balance for your brother's wedding reception is $27,000. How would you like to take care of that today?" For a second, I thought she had the wrong number. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Raleigh, North Carolina. Coffee still hot, sunlight coming through the window. Nothing about that moment said it was about to turn into something else. But 2 Mayans 7-3. For a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend? I set my cup down slowly. "I'm sorry," I said. "Why would you think I'm paying for my brother's wedding?" There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that tells you something is already wrong. "Your name," she said carefully, "is listed as the financial guarantor on the contract." And just like that, everything came back. The vineyard, the string lights, my parents standing at the entrance like they were guarding something, and my mother's voice quiet, firm, and impossible to misunderstand. "Only family is allowed inside." I remember looking at her, thinking I'd heard it wrong. "Mom," I said, "I am family." She didn't hesitate. "You weren't invited." And standing there in that gravel driveway, holding a gift I'd driven 8 hours to deliver, I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit before. I wasn't the guest they forgot. I was the responsibility they expected to pay for everything, without ever being let inside. To understand how I ended up in that moment, sitting at my kitchen table, being asked to pay $27,000 for a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend, you need to understand who I am. My name is Susan Parker. I'm 61 years old, and I live alone in a small one-story house in Raleigh, North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just over 1,200 square feet, a narrow front porch, and a maple tree in the backyard that turns a deep red every fall. It's quiet here, the kind of quiet you learn to appreciate after a lifetime of noise. Most mornings start the same way. Coffee brewing before sunrise, the local radio station humming in the background. If the weather's decent, I take a short walk around the block, maybe a mile or so, just enough to clear my head. It's a simple life, but it's one I built on purpose. I spent 25 years in the United States Navy. Logistics. Not the kind of role people make movies about, but the kind that keeps everything else from falling apart. You learn quickly in that line of work details matter, timing matters, and most of all, people depend on you whether they realize it or not. After I retired, I didn't feel much need to slow down. Twice a week, I volunteer at the VA center not far from here, mostly paperwork, helping older veterans figure out benefits, appointments, things that shouldn't be as complicated as they are. It's honest work, the kind where you can look someone in the eye at the end of the day and know you did something useful. I've always been the dependable one, the one who shows up, the one who figures things out when no one else does. My younger brother David, he's always been different. He's 8 years younger than me. Growing up, he was the one my parents worried about, needed a little more help, a few more chances, and somewhere along the way, without anyone really saying it out loud, I became the one they leaned on, the one who handled things, the one who didn't make life harder. And the truth is, for most of my life, I didn't mind that role. Because when you're capable, people expect you to carry more. What you don't always realize is how easily that turns into something else. Not appreciation, expectation, and sometimes, entitlement. I just didn't realize how far that expectation had gone. Not until the moment I stood outside that vineyard in Ohio, holding a wedding gift in my hands, and realized I wasn't walking in as family. I was walking in as a solution. I didn't become the dependable one overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, the way most family roles do. David is 8 years younger than me, and from the beginning, he needed more attention. That's the word my parents like to use. More attention, more patience, more understanding. If he forgot something, it was because he was overwhelmed. If I handled something, it was because I was capable. And when you're the capable one, people stop asking if you're okay carrying the weight. They just hand it to you. I remember small things at first. School projects he didn't finish, I'd stay up late helping him pull something together. Bills that got missed, I'd step in, make a call, fix it. Holidays, birthdays, family plans. I was always the one making sure everything ran smoothly. Not because anyone told me to, because someone had to. And over time, it became less of a favor and more of an expectation. My parents never said it outright, but it was always there, underneath everything. David needed support. I didn't. He needed protection. I could handle myself. It wasn't meant to be unfair, it just became that way. When I joined the Navy at 18, I think that gap widened. To them, it probably looked like I was leaving, building a life somewhere else, becoming independent in a way that didn't require them anymore. And in their minds, independence turned into distance. But that's not what it was. I wasn't pulling away. I was just standing on my own feet. Still, every time I came home on leave, the dynamic hadn't changed. David was still the center of concern. I was still the one expected to adjust, to be flexible, to understand. And I did. For years, I did. Even after I retired. Even after I built a quiet, steady life in North Carolina. If David needed something advice, help, a little extra support, I was there. No questions asked. That's what family does, right? That's what I always believed. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Because helping someone is one thing. Being expected to fix everything is something else entirely. And the hardest part isn't realizing that people rely on you. It's realizing they've started to rely on you without respect. I just didn't see how far that had gone. Not until I was standing outside that vineyard, 8 hours from home, holding a gift in my hands, and realizing that to them, I wasn't really a sister walking into a wedding. I was the person they assumed would clean up whatever came after it. The drive from Raleigh to Columbus is about 8 hours if traffic behaves. I've made that trip before. Long stretches of highway, gas stations that all start to look the same, the kind of drive where your thoughts get louder the farther you go. I left just after sunrise that Thursday morning, a small overnight bag in the back seat and a neatly wrapped box riding shotgun. Inside that box was a set of crystal glasses, nothing extravagant, just something simple, something useful. The kind of gift that says, I showed up, I thought about you, because that's what this was, at least to me. Showing up. The closer I got to Ohio, the more memories started creeping in. Our old house, Sunday dinners, my mother humming in the kitchen, David laughing about something that didn't matter at the time but felt important anyway. Families have a way of living in your memory differently than they do in real life. By the time I pulled into the vineyard, the sun was starting to dip low, casting that soft golden light across the rows of grapevines. It was the kind of place people pick for weddings when they want everything to look perfect in photographs. Gravel driveway, white lights strung between posts, guests dressed up and smiling like nothing in the world could go wrong. For a moment, I let myself believe that. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my jacket, and picked up the gift. There's a certain feeling you get walking into a place like that, like you're stepping into a moment that matters. I hadn't seen most of my family in a while. I figured this was as good a time as any to close the distance. Then I saw them. My parents were standing near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. My father noticed me first. His expression changed before he said a word. Not anger, not surprise, something tighter than that. My mother turned a second later, and when her eyes landed on me, she walked over quickly, lowering her voice before she even reached me. "Susan," she said, "what are you doing here?" For a second, I thought she was joking. "I came for the wedding," I said. She glanced back toward the doors, then back at me. "Only family is allowed inside." I let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "Mom, I am family." She hesitated, just for a moment, but it was long enough. "You weren't invited." Everything around me kept moving. People walking past us, heels on gravel, quiet laughter drifting out from inside the barn. Somewhere, a cork popped from a champagne bottle, life continuing like nothing had changed. But for me, it had. I looked at her, waiting for her to correct it, to soften it, to say something that made it make sense. She didn't. My father stepped closer, his voice lower. "We didn't think you'd actually come." That landed harder than anything else. Not invited, and not expected. I shifted the gift in my hands, suddenly aware of how out of place it felt. 8 hours on the road, thinking I was walking into a family moment, and standing there realizing I'd been left out of it entirely. "David knows I'm here," I said. My mother's expression tightened. "He has a lot going on today." That wasn't an answer. It was an exit. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I should have. Long enough to feel the weight of it settle in. Not loud, Not dramatic. Just clear. Sometimes the deepest kind of rejection doesn't come with raised voices. It comes quietly. I nodded once. Well, I said, keeping my voice steady. I won't cause a scene. I handed her the gift. She took it, awkward, like she wasn't sure what to do with it anymore. Give this to them, I said. Then I turned and walked back toward the parking lot. Gravel crunching under my shoes, the sound sharper now. Every step taking me farther away from something I thought I still belonged to. I sat in my car for a while before starting the engine. Not crying, not angry, just thinking. Because somewhere between Raleigh and that vineyard, I had driven 8 hours to show up as a sister. And found out I wasn't one anymore. 3 days later, I was back in my kitchen in Raleigh. Same table, same chair, same quiet morning light coming through the window like nothing in the world had changed. But it had. My phone was on speaker when it rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, maybe habit, maybe instinct, made me answer. Susan Parker? The woman asked. Yes. Her voice was polite, careful, the kind of tone people use when they're discussing something expensive. Ma'am, I'm calling from the vineyard regarding your brother's wedding reception. The remaining balance is $27,000. How would you like to take care of that today? For a moment, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear her, because I was trying to understand what she had just said. I glanced down at my coffee, still steaming. Looked out the window at the quiet street. Everything looked exactly the same, except it wasn't. I'm sorry, I said finally, keeping my voice even. Why would you think I'm paying for my brother's wedding? There was a pause, papers shifting on her end of the line. Well, she said, choosing her words carefully, your name is listed as the financial guarantor on the reception contract. And just like that, the vineyard came back. The gravel, the lights. My mother's voice telling me I wasn't family. I leaned back slowly in my chair. My name? I repeated. Yes, ma'am, Susan Parker. This phone number, this email. Everything she said was correct. Except for one thing. I never agreed to that, I said. Another pause. I understand, she replied, though her tone suggested she didn't fully know what to understand yet. If you'd like, I can email you a copy of the contract. I would appreciate that. We ended the call, and for a few seconds, I just sat there. Not angry. Not yet. Just still. At 61, you learn something about moments like this. When something doesn't make sense, the worst thing you can do is react too quickly. So I waited. About 20 minutes later, the email came through. I opened it. Invoices, receipts, line items. Dinner for 140 guests. Open bar, live band, late-night dessert table. A total just over $32,000, with $5,000 already paid, leaving $27,000. And then I opened the contract. Scrolled down. There it was. Financial guarantor. Susan Parker. My name. My contact information. Everything typed neatly, professionally. And right below it, the signature. I stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't mine. Not even close. Someone had written my name like they were copying it from memory. The shape was off, the spacing wrong. A signature without familiarity behind it. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Well, I said quietly to the empty room. That explains a few things. Because suddenly, it all fit. The confidence, the assumption, the way no one had asked me. They hadn't needed to. They had already decided. My phone buzzed again, another email from the same woman. This one included the email thread. I opened it. The first message was from David. Just confirming my sister Susan will be covering the remaining balance as our wedding gift. I read that line once, then again. Then I kept reading. She's flying in from North Carolina. You can contact her directly if needed. And then the part that settled everything. She'll probably want the invoice sent after the wedding so it doesn't ruin the surprise. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Made without me. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of a car passing outside. Normal life. Unchanged. And right in the middle of it, a $27,000 expectation had just been placed on my shoulders like it belonged there. Like it always had. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and set it back down. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about money. It was about something much older. Something I had been carrying for a long time without ever putting a name to it. And for the first time, I wasn't going to carry it. I didn't pick up the phone right away when David called. I let it ring once, twice, long enough to remind myself that I didn't owe anyone an immediate answer anymore. Then I answered. "Hello, David." He didn't bother with a greeting. "What did you tell the venue?" he asked, his voice tight. I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the contract still open on my laptop. My name sitting there like it had every right to be. "I told them the truth," I said calmly. "That I never agreed to pay for your wedding." There was a pause. Then, "You were supposed to help." Not "would you help?" Not "can you help?" Supposed to. I let that sit for a second. "David," I said, keeping my tone steady, "you told a business that I would pay $27,000 without ever speaking to me. You can afford it." There it was again. That same sentence. Simple, clean, completely detached from everything that actually mattered. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again. "That's not the point," I said. "It kind of is," he pushed back. "It's not like this would ruin you." "No," I said quietly, "but it says a lot about you." Silence. Not the kind that feels empty, the kind that feels exposed. "You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be," he muttered. And that was the moment something inside me settled completely, because I realized he didn't see it. Not the forgery, not the assumption, not the fact that I had been turned away from the wedding and still expected to pay for it. He saw a problem, and he expected me to solve it, just like I always had. I glanced back at the signature on the screen. "My name is on a contract I didn't sign," I said. "Do you understand what that means?" He exhaled sharply. "Mom handled the paperwork." "Of course she did." "And you knew?" I asked. Another pause. "We talked about you helping out," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Silence again. And this time, it was enough. I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see me. "All right," I said. "Then let me be clear so there's no confusion going forward." My voice didn't rise, didn't harden. If anything, it became quieter. "I did not sign that contract. I did not agree to be your financial guarantor, and I am not paying that bill." "You're really going to do this?" he asked, disbelief creeping in. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm just not fixing what I didn't break." He let out a frustrated breath. "You're my sister." "Yes," I said, "I am. Families help each other." I looked down at my hands, resting calmly on the table. "They also respect each other," I said. That stopped him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his voice dropped slightly. "So that's it? You're just walking away?" I thought about that. About the vineyard. About my mother's words. About the 8-hour drive. "I didn't walk away," I said softly. "I was never let in." That silence was different. He didn't argue this time. Didn't push. Because there are some truths that don't leave room for debate. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked finally. And for the first time, there was something else in his voice. Not anger. Not entitlement. Uncertainty. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the window. "The same thing everyone else does when they sign something," I said. "You figure it out." He didn't respond right away. And when he did, it was quieter than I'd ever heard him. "You really would have paid, wouldn't you?" That question caught me off guard. I considered it honestly. "Yes," I said, "if you had asked." Another long pause. Then the line went quiet. And as I set the phone down, I realized something I probably should have understood a long time ago. This wasn't the moment everything broke. It was the moment everything became visible. The forgery. The assumption. The expectation that I would carry whatever they placed in front of me, without question. But not this time. This time, the truth was written clearly. Not in ink. Not on a contract. But in the choice I had just made. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't signing my name to something that wasn't mine. The next morning, I sat down at the same kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and the contract open in front of me. Same house. Same quiet. Same sunlight coming through the window. But something inside me was different. Not louder. Not emotional. Just settled. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop questioning what you already know is right. I read through the document one more time. Every line. Every detail. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to be certain that when I acted, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. Then I opened a blank document. No legal language. No unnecessary explanations. Just the truth. I, Susan Parker, have never agreed to serve as financial guarantor for this event. The signature on the contract is not mine. I did not authorize its use in any capacity. I read it once, then again. Simple. Clear. Enough. I attached it to an email and sent it back to Karen Mitchell at the Vineyard. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just done. For a few seconds after I hit send, I sat there quietly, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing down the street. Life moving forward, the same as it always had. But for me, something had shifted. Because this wasn't just about a contract, it was about a pattern. Years of stepping in, years of smoothing things over, years of being the one who made sure everything worked even when it cost me something no one else saw. And for most of my life, I never questioned it. I told myself it was what family does. You help. You show up. You carry what needs to be carried. But there's a difference between helping and being expected to carry everything. And somewhere along the way, that line had disappeared. Until now. My phone buzzed about an hour later. A short message from Karen Mitchell. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. We've received your statement. Our legal team will review and follow up accordingly. Professional. Neutral. Exactly what I expected. No drama. No accusations. Just process. I appreciated that. Because at this point, I wasn't interested in arguing with anyone. I was interested in letting the truth stand on its own. Later that afternoon, I drove over to the VA Center like I always do on Tuesdays. Same brick building, same worn-out chairs in the waiting area, same stack of paperwork waiting on the desk. Walter Brooks was already there when I walked in. Well, he said with a small grin, I thought you were off celebrating a wedding. I hung my jacket on the back of my chair. Plans changed. He studied me for a moment. Not prying, just noticing. You all right? I poured myself a cup of that terrible coffee and sat down across from him. Let me ask you something, I said. If someone handed you a $27,000 bill for something you never agreed to, what would you do? He raised an eyebrow. First thing I'd do is make sure they've got the right Susan Parker. I smiled faintly. That was my first thought too. Then I told him, the Vineyard. The contract. The signature. He listened without interrupting, leaning back in his chair like he'd heard stories like this before. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. That's something, he said. That's one way to put it. He looked at me for a second longer, then asked the only question that really mattered. You gonna pay it? No. The answer came easily. No hesitation. No doubt. Just, no. He nodded once. Good. I looked at him. No lecture about family? He gave a small shrug. Susan, he said, I've learned something over the years. Blood might make you related, but respect is what makes you family. I sat with that for a moment, because that was it. That was the line I had been missing all these years. Respect. Not obligation. Not expectation. Respect. And, for the first time in a long time, I had chosen to stand on it. That line stayed with me longer than I expected. Respect is what makes you family. I was still thinking about it that evening when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't David. It was my father. I let it ring once, then answered. Hello, Dad. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background, the same living room I'd grown up in. Susan, he said, we need to talk. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not anger. Not exactly. Pressure. I set my phone on the table and leaned back in my chair. All right, I said calmly. What would you like to talk about? The Vineyard called your mother this morning. I imagine they did. They said you told them you're not responsible for the bill. That's correct. Silence. Then he said it. Well, we thought you would help. No apology. No explanation. Just that same quiet assumption, dressed up like it was reasonable. I folded my hands together, resting them on the table. Dad, I said gently. I drove 8 hours to attend David's wedding. I know. You and Mom stopped me at the door. That was a misunderstanding. I almost smiled at that. A misunderstanding? I repeated. They had 140 guests inside. That wasn't a misunderstanding. He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was trying to find a way to say something that didn't exist. David's fiancée wanted to keep things small. he said finally. Small? I said. 140 people is small now? Another pause. Then he said something that explained more than he probably intended. We didn't think you'd actually come. I stared at the wall in front of me for a moment. You didn't think I'd come to my own brother's wedding. You've been distant, he said. I've been living my life. Yes, he replied. Exactly. There it was. That old idea. That choosing your own path somehow meant you'd stepped away from your family. I took a slow breath. I'm not sure how any of that explains putting my name on a $27,000 contract, I said. This time, the silence stretched longer. Your mother handled the paperwork, he said finally. Of course she did. And David? I asked. Did he know? Another pause. He knew we were asking you to help. That's not what I asked. No answer. I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see me. You put my name on a contract I didn't sign, I said. That's not helping. That's taking. You can afford it, he said. Same sentence, same reasoning, different voice. I let that settle. Dad, I said quietly, this isn't about whether I can afford it. Well, it certainly isn't about whether we can, he replied, frustration creeping in now. Your mother and I are retired. We don't have that kind of money. I understand that. Then you see the problem. Yes, I said, and I meant it. I saw it clearly. The problem wasn't the bill. It was the belief behind it. For 61 years, my family had believed something about me that eventually, no matter what, I would step in and carry whatever needed to be carried. And the truth was, they weren't wrong. I had done it my entire life. But something had changed. Standing in that gravel parking lot had changed it. That quiet moment where I realized I didn't belong the way I thought I did. I'm not paying that bill, I said. The words came out steady, not sharp, not emotional, just final. My father let out a long breath. You're really going to let your brother start his marriage buried in debt? I thought about that carefully. Then I answered honestly. No, I said. He did that himself. Silence. Heavy this time. You've always been stubborn, he muttered. A faint smile crossed my face. You used to call it responsibility. Well, sometimes responsibility means helping family. And sometimes, I said quietly, it means teaching them not to make the same mistake again. He didn't respond, because there wasn't much left to say. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to fix the conversation. The next few days were quiet. No calls, no messages, no attempts to argue me into changing my mind. And at my age, I've learned something about silence. It usually means one of two things. Either people are calming down, or they're figuring out what to do next. I went back to my routine. Grocery store on Wednesday morning. Same place, about 2 miles down the road. Same cashier who's been there for years. Morning, Susan, she said as she scanned my bread and eggs. Morning, Susan. Simple conversations. Ordinary moments. The kind of life that doesn't make headlines but holds steady when everything else starts shifting. But somewhere up in Ohio, I knew things weren't so steady. Because businesses don't forget about $27,000. They follow up, and they follow up seriously. 3 days later, Karen Mitchell called again. Her voice was different this time. Softer, more measured. Mrs. Parker, she said. I wanted to update you on the situation regarding the reception contract. I set my coffee down and listened. Our legal department reviewed the statement you provided along with the contract documentation. That sounds thorough, I said. It is, she replied. Then she paused briefly. Because the signature on the guarantor line cannot be verified as yours, the venue cannot legally hold you responsible for the remaining balance. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. That makes sense. However, she continued carefully, the contract was still executed by the primary clients, your brother and his fiancée, so the financial responsibility has been reassigned to them. There it was. Clear. Simple. Final. Have they been notified? I asked. Yes, ma'am. A small pause. Your brother seemed surprised. I couldn't help it. I let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Well, I said gently, that makes 2 of us. Karen Mitchell chuckled softly, then added, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you handled the situation with remarkable calm. I thought about that for a second. 25 years in the Navy, I said. You learn that reacting emotionally usually makes things worse. Well, she replied, for what it's worth, I think you handled yourself with a great deal of dignity. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something had been corrected. A balance that had been off for a long time, finally settling back into place. That evening, my phone rang again. David. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. His voice came through tight, sharper than before. They reassigned the bill to me. Yes, I said calmly. They did. You did this. No, I replied. You did. There was a pause. You could have helped, he said. I could have been invited. That stopped him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. You don't understand how embarrassing this is, he muttered. I leaned back in my chair. David, I said, you told a business that I would pay $27,000 without asking me. It was supposed to be a gift. A gift requires consent. Silence again. Then he said something that sounded almost familiar. You always make things more complicated than they need to be. I shook my head slightly. Actually, I said, this is the first time I've kept things very simple. How do you figure that? You signed the contract, I said. Now you're responsible for it. That's not fair. I let out a small breath. Fair? I repeated. You're talking about fair? Another pause. You're my sister, he said. That's true. Families help each other. Yes, I said. They also tell each other the truth. Silence. Longer this time. He exhaled slowly. So what am I supposed to do? I looked out the window, watching the light fade just slightly as the evening settled in. The same thing anyone else does when they have a debt, I said. You figure it out. He didn't respond right away. And when he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Quieter. Less certain. I don't have $27,000. I know. Another pause. And then, for the first time since all of this started, he sounded unsure. Susan, did we really hurt you that badly? I didn't answer immediately, because some questions deserve a moment. Yes, I said softly. I did. David didn't call again for a while after that. 2 weeks, maybe a little more. And in that silence, something important happened. Not to me. To them. Because when you stop stepping in, people are forced to step up. I went on with my life. Morning walks, coffee at the same kitchen table, Tuesdays at the VA center, helping men my age and older sort through paperwork that should have been simple but never is. Real problems, honest ones, the kind that don't come with shortcuts. And somewhere up in Ohio, my family was dealing with something they couldn't hand off anymore. My father called one afternoon while I was standing in the parking lot behind the center. Susan, he said, do you have a minute? I do. He didn't get straight to the point right away. That wasn't like him. Your mother and I met with David yesterday. I leaned against my car, listening. They're working out a payment plan with the venue, he continued. It's going to take a few years. That sounds reasonable, I said. There was a pause. Then he said something I hadn't expected. Your mother wants to apologize. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't hear him, because I needed a second to understand what that meant. She knows she handled things poorly, he added. That's one way to put it. And David, he's embarrassed. I let out a small breath. That might be a good place for him to start. My father gave a quiet, almost reluctant chuckle. You always did have a way of putting things plainly. That comes with practice. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his voice softened. You know, when you joined the Navy, your mother thought you were running away. Running away from what? From us? I looked out across the lot, watching the wind move through the trees. That's not what it was, I said quietly. I was building a life. He took that in. I suppose we never really understood that. I know. Another pause. Then he said something that settled deeper than I expected. We always saw you as the one who didn't need help. I closed my eyes briefly. Capable people still need respect, I said. Yes, he replied. I see that now. And for the first time, I believed him. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had shifted. Not in words, in understanding. Your mother cried after the wedding, he said. I didn't know what to do with that. Why? I asked. She realized too late what she said to you. I nodded slowly. I never wanted distance, I said. I just wanted to matter. You did, he said. We just didn't show it well. That was honest. And honesty was new. Before we hung up, he asked something I hadn't expected. Would you come home for Thanksgiving? I thought about it. About the vineyard. About the phone calls. About everything that had changed. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's fair." As I ended the call, I stood there for a moment in the quiet. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close. Because sometimes, people don't change when you argue with them. They change when you finally stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. Thanksgiving came with that familiar Ohio chill, the kind that settles into the air before winter fully arrives. Gray sky, bare trees, the kind of day that makes you think more than you talk. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in nearly 4 years. The drive felt different this time. Not heavy like the trip to the wedding. Just quiet, thoughtful. Like I wasn't going back to fix anything, I was going back to see what had changed. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how that happens. Time doesn't just change people, it changes perspective. My father opened the door before I knocked. "Hi, Susan." "Hi, Dad." For a moment, we just stood there. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled like it always did on Thanksgiving. Turkey, stuffing, my mother's pumpkin pie. Some things don't change, no matter how much everything else does. She was standing in the kitchen when I walked in. When she turned and saw me, she didn't hesitate. She walked straight over and hugged me. Not politely, not carefully. Just held on. "I'm sorry," she whispered. 2 words, but after everything, they carried weight. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I handled the wedding terribly," she said. "Yes," I replied gently. No anger, no edge, just truth. David came in a moment later, his wife beside him. He looked different. Not older, just quieter. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," I said again. He nodded. "We're paying it off. The venue set up a plan. It's going to take a few years." I heard. He hesitated. "You're not angry?" I thought about that. "I was," I said. "But anger doesn't last forever." Dinner that night wasn't loud like it used to be. It was honest. We talked. Really talked. About work. About life. About things we had avoided for years. No pretending. No smoothing things over. Just people sitting at the same table, finally seeing each other clearly. Later, as I stood by the window in my old room, looking out at the quiet street, I realized something. This whole thing started with a door being closed in my face, but it didn't end there. Because sometimes, the way back into a family isn't through the front door. It's through truth. And the willingness to finally treat each other like it matters. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I had learned a long time ago. Family isn't defined by who shares your name. It's defined by how they treat you when it matters. For years, I believed being strong meant carrying more, fixing problems, stepping in, making things easier for everyone else. But strength isn't about how much you can carry. Sometimes, it's about knowing what not to carry. Respect isn't automatic. It doesn't come with blood, history, or shared memories. It's built through actions, through honesty, through accountability, through the simple choice to treat someone like they matter. And when that respect is missing, no amount of sacrifice will replace it. What I learned is this: you don't have to raise your voice to stand your ground. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is quietly refuse to sign your name to something that was never yours to carry. This story reminds us that being dependable is a strength, but it should never become an invitation for others to take advantage of us. Family is not defined by blood alone, it is defined by respect, honesty, and accountability. In real life, many people spend years carrying burdens that were never truly theirs, simply because they are the strong one. But maturity means knowing the difference between helping and being used. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, it is self-respect. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stay calm, tell the truth, and refuse to carry what belongs to someone else.